For decades, Porsche has been on the top, and a GT3 would be the perfect representation of a pure driver's car. High revving, naturally aspirated, stick shift, rear-wheel drive, and nothing more other than the glorious 6-cylinder roar. It is not easily attainable, but it is the bedroom post car. What makes its engine so special, and what does it mean to have a Mezger? Hans Mezger is a great and significant part of Porsche's history. He's like Paul Roche for BMW, and his talent and knowledge as a Stuttgart Technical University graduate brought Porsche where it is now. Right after school, he was given a role in a 4-cam Porsche 356 engine development, and only 3 years later he was already working on a Type 753 Formula 1 flat 8 engine for the Porsche 804. He was the one who thought it would be a great idea to place a twin-turbo into the Porsche 917 and crush everybody in a Can-Am series with a power of 1100 horsepower. This experience was later transformed into the very first 911 Turbo in 1975. Mezger retired in 1994, but left Porsche a lot of valuable knowledge. In the 1990s, after the 996 introduction, the company intended to make a high-performance, naturally aspirated version of the 911 to follow the Carrera RS tradition. For some reason, they picked a different name, a GT3, to go along with a GT2 series. It was even prior to the first GT3 racing series in 2005. It had to be an extraordinary model with a completely different suspension, brakes, and even the engine. A sort of a race car on plates. Alongside the 996 gen, the M96 engine was revealed as well, but for the purpose of the GT3, it was hardly an idle architecture. This was not meant to be a coffee racer, they aimed to race with it as well. Porsche looked back at the tried and true concept of an air-cooled Mezger engine, the one that even the Porsche 962 and 911 GT1 brought the company dozens of victories and constructors' titles. Although the GT1 was not the fastest car in the Le Mans, it beat them all thanks to the incredible reliability of the Mezger unit. That's why Porsche decided to go more of the GT1 way than the M96 Carrera engine. The GT3 engine may have a codename of the M96, but it has nothing to do with the M96 Carrera engine. It uses a split crankcase, a 7 main bearing setup, and a cylinder castings with pressed-on Nikkasi liners. These originally air-cooled cylinders were reworked to have water jackets, a water pump, and a true dedicated dry sump system with piston oil squirters, much different from the wet sump of the Carrera engine. A 6-head system was also replaced with a single one per bank, and there was no harmonic damper on the crankshaft pulley. Interestingly, until mid-2004, the 964 casting number was still visible on the engine block and other places typical of air-cooled engines. Later on, it would show the 996 number, but the design remained the same. As a naturally aspirated engine, it needed a displacement and revs in order to provide sufficient power. The cylinder size of 100 by 76.4 mm gave a total volume of 3600 cc, and the engine was not shy of a 7800 rev limiter. It was achieved thanks to a 4-valve setup, forged aluminum pistons, titanium connecting rods, a compression ratio of 11.7 to 1, and a 2-stage intake system. The final output was 360 horsepower at 7200 rpm. What's interesting is that there was a 993 GT2 transmission used for its gear ratio modularity. Produced in Weissach, the 996.1 GT3 was made in a number of 1858 and managed to run the Nordschleife at 7 minutes and 54 seconds. In 2003, Porsche developed a facelifted model which had to be manufactured outside the Weissach factory for production line limits. It was the first Porsche motorsport product made in Zuffenhausen. The engine, the M96.79, was marginally modified, but they squeezed some 20 ponies more out of it at 7400 rpm thanks to adding a VarioCam variable intake camshaft. They made 2,313 of them, and it was the first GT3 available for the US market. In 2003, Porsche also introduced a GT3 RS, which was mostly reworked everywhere but in the engine bay. The Flat 6 only received a head redesign and is said to have the same output as the GT3. However, dyno tests showed that the power is well over the 400 horsepower figure with peak RPM at 8200. All these engines do have the infamous intermediate shaft, but as the base is entirely different compared to the M96, they do not suffer from cooling and oiling issues. The oiling galleries of the GT1 engine were made in a way that the IMS bearings are lubricated at all times. Followed by the 997 GT3. The GT3 buyers showed even more interest in a sharp, naturally aspirated 911. The original engine was reworked and provided up to 415 horsepower, some RPM higher. The intake camshaft with an updated VarioCam allowed for even greater cam adjustment, and there was an aluminum 3-stage variable intake system. It served as propulsion for both the GT3 and GT3 RS, and Walter Roll drove a Nürburgring lap in 7 minutes and 42 seconds in the 997 GT3. The Mezger was slightly modified for the 997.2 generation. It received new forged pistons, reworked oil pumps, a compression ratio of 12.2 to 1, hollow camshafts, and a variable cam adjuster on the exhaust side as well. Most importantly, engineers increased the bore width to 102.7mm, which brought the volume up to the 3.8 liter territory, and power increased to 435 horsepower. Besides, the rev limiter was up to 8500 rpm as well. The Rennsport model had up to 450 horsepower, but a swan song of the 997 and the Mezger engine itself came as a surprise from Porsche, a GT3 RS 4.0. The bore-out engine was fitted with an 80.4mm stroke crankshaft, and alongside a high compression ratio of 12.6 to 1, they squeezed 500 horsepower and 460 Nm of torque out of it. They kept the production at 600 examples. The 996 Turbo and 997.1 Turbo models, as well as the 996 and 997 GT2 and GT2 RS were also using the Mezger engine with various modifications to allow the turbochargers to work properly. Major things changed in 2013 when the 991 GT3 came along. Gone was the manual gearbox, for which Porsche received a lot of pushback from customers, and so was gone the Mezger engine, replaced by a Carrera-based 3.8 liter 981 unit. From the inside out, it is a new engine from the ground up that purists may not like as much, but it really is on the next level. The design of the 981 was also completely different to the Carrera M96 and the 97 engines, and was made ready for the GT3 right from the beginning. It has 4 extraction pumps, plus the main electronic oil pump with 2 initial extraction points at the front and rear inside the dry sump oil pan. The engine block is similar to the Carrera 3.8, but uses a different crankshaft, twin oil squirters per cylinder, forged aluminum pistons, and forged titanium conrods. The heads are GT3 specific with hydraulic lifters, hollow drilled valves, a VarioCam variable timing, and a high pressure fuel pump drive. It was the first direct injected GT3 engine with twin high pressure fuel pumps. The 991 no longer uses an intermediate shaft to drive the camshafts. What made the 991 GT3 engine so cool was an incredibly high rev limiter of 9,000 RPM and a power of 475 horsepower. Its Nürburgring lap time fell down to 7 minutes and 25 seconds. The Rennsport version brought an engine displacement of 4 liters based on the 981 design, but it was hardly just about the increase of volume. There was a different crankshaft with the longer stroke of 81.5mm, different conrods, pistons, and even its own crankcase casting. Its rev limiter, however, was at 8800 RPM and it made 500 horsepower. Invisible from the outside, but the Gen 2 4-liter is like a day and night difference compared to the Gen 1 4-liter. They share a couple of components like an engine block and cylinder dimensions, but being a 981.5 type, it was simply engineered differently. The core is a new crankshaft placed onto bigger main bearings and carrying bigger conrod rollers, which certainly made the crankshaft stiffer and more high RPM wear resistant. There are new pistons, rods, a different cylinder coating, and even high compression ratio. The new is also the valve train, which now accommodates finger followers without hydraulic adjustment. It eliminates a need for higher oil pressure and volume and also adds stiff valve springs, resulting in higher efficiency. Porsche says that it won't need adjustment sooner than 100,000 miles. As part of the lubrication, the dry sump system has 7 scavenge pumps and a new main pump. A 3-way variable intake system is also standard. The Gen 2 engine is so different in mechanics and feelings that owners prefer the 991.2 GT3 over the 991.1 GT3 RS. Porsche put a lot of effort in making it more eager, more rev-heavy, and more torquey. As a bonus, the company reintroduced a stick shifter for the GT3, which combined with the 9000 RPM revving engine is simply a joy to live with. The GT3 RS used a slightly reworked engine with a titanium exhaust system and a revised intake, having some 20 horsepower and 10 Nm more over the Gen 1 4-liter GT3 RS. The 992 generation is a dramatically different car with such bits and pieces like the double wishbone front suspension, but the engine is a carryover from the 991.2 GT3. It is not 100% the same, but core items are. However, there is a new variable resonance intake system which incorporates 6 individual throttle bodies. There is also a regular main throttle body as a backup, but is constantly open during normal driving. There is the big bearing crankshaft, wide conrods, and plasma-coated cylinder liners. Despite the particulate filters, it is 10 horsepower and 10 Nm up compared to the previous GT3. What's interesting is the fact that beyond the exhaust and ECU, the whole engine is used unchanged for the Cup cars. Not to forget, this is the first GT3 to run the whole Nordschleife lap under 7 minutes, and it was not the engine dynamics that helped this much. How long will Porsche be able to make these high-revving naturally aspirated engines is not known yet, but the 992 GT3 RS is getting one soon for sure. Even if it is the last one, I'm saying well done Porsche and thank you. Even without the Mezger, they proved the world what an engine builder they are.